They said it would be different this year. My son called on a Wednesday evening in early October, which was unusual enough that I almost didn't answer. He rarely called on weekdays. He rarely called on weekdays. He rarely called at all unless something was wrong or something was needed. But I picked up, and his voice sounded warm, and for a moment I let myself forget that warmth and want are not always the same thing. "Mom, we've been talking," he said. "Stephanie and I, we want you to come for Thanksgiving this year. A real one, the whole week if you can manage it." I was standing in my kitchen in Roanoke, Virginia, still in my apron from dinner. The window above the sink was dark. November had not arrived yet, but I could already feel it coming in through the gaps around the frame. That particular cold that settles into old houses and old bones alike. "You sure?" I asked. I didn't mean it the way it might sound. I meant it the way you mean something when you've asked the same question too many times and learned to protect yourself by asking it again. "Of course we're sure," he said. "The kids keep asking about you. They want to show you the new backyard. We redid the whole thing this summer. You'd love it." I turned off the stove. I sat down at the kitchen table. I said yes before I had time to talk myself out of it. His name was Neil. He was 43 years old, my only child. The one I had raised by myself after his father walked out when Neil was 6. I had worked double shifts at the hospital for 11 years, first as a nursing aide and then as a licensed practical nurse, until I finished my degree at 40 and became a registered nurse at last. I had made every school lunch, attended every science fair, driven to every practice, cried quietly in the parking lot of the high school when he walked across the stage in a cap and gown, because I had not expected to feel so proud and so finished at the same time. He married Stephanie when he was 32. She was pleasant enough, careful with me, the way you are careful with something fragile that belongs to someone else. She called me by my name, which was Harriet, though I had told her once, early on, that she could call me Mom if she ever felt comfortable. She never felt comfortable. That was fine. Not everyone does. They lived in Portland, Oregon, in a house that always looked like it belonged in a magazine. Everything chosen and arranged, nothing accidental. My grandchildren were Owen, who was 10, and Lily, who was 7. I had not seen them since the previous Christmas, and before that, not since Owen's birthday in the spring of the year before that. So I did what I had always done. I started preparing. I booked a flight for the Monday before Thanksgiving. 6 days in Portland, returning the following Sunday. I found good prices on nonstop tickets because I checked every day for 2 weeks. I bought a new cardigan in a soft blue, the kind of color that photographs well, because I knew Stephanie would take photographs, and I wanted to look like someone who belonged there. I knitted Owen a wool beanie in his favorite color, which was dark green, because he had told me so the previous Christmas while we were sitting on the floor by the tree, and I had stored it away in the part of my memory reserved only for things the children said. I found Lily a set of watercolor pencils and a thick sketch pad because her mother had mentioned, once, in passing, that Lily liked to draw. For Neil, I chose a leather-bound journal, the kind with a strap that wraps around it, because he used to write when he was young and I always thought he had stopped doing it too soon. For Stephanie, a silk scarf, pale gold, beautiful and impersonal, because I never knew what else to get her. And I had stopped pretending otherwise. I told my neighbor Wanda I'd be gone for a week. She was 71 and sharp as a tack and had been watering my plants since her husband passed 4 years ago because it gave her somewhere to walk to in the mornings. I told my friend from church, a woman named Bet, who hugged me in the parking lot and said, "Finally, it's about time he had you out there." I believed her. I believed all of it. The morning of my flight, I woke up at 4:30. I had not set an alarm. My body simply knew. I made coffee, checked my bags twice, left a light on in the kitchen, and drove to the airport in the dark. The roads were empty and I found myself talking to the windshield, just quietly, just to myself, saying things like, "This is good. This is going to be good," the way you do when you're not entirely sure, but you need the words out loud anyway. The flight was smooth. I sat in a window seat and watched the country change beneath me, the flat browns and greens of the mid-Atlantic giving way to the Rockies, and then to the thick green of the Pacific Northwest. When we began our descent into Portland, I pressed my nose to the cold plastic of the window and watched the trees. So many trees, a different world. We landed 14 minutes early. I gathered my carry-on and walked up the jetway and into the terminal with my heart doing something embarrassing in my chest. I had not felt that way in years. That particular kind of hope, the kind that lives just below your sternum and makes everything feel slightly too bright. I came through the doors into arrivals and scanned the waiting area. Couples, families, a man in a suit holding a sign. I looked for Neil's height. He was 6'2", always easy to find in a crowd. I looked for the children, for Lily's dark hair, for Owen's way of standing with his hands in his pockets even at 10 years old. The waiting area thinned, then emptied. Then was just me and the man with the sign, who eventually found his passenger and left. I checked my phone. No messages. I sent one, just landed at PDX. Baggage claim. Can't wait to hug everyone. I waited near the baggage carousel and watched my suitcase come around twice before I finally lifted it off. I wheeled it to the curb and stood in the November air, which in Portland smelled like rain and pine and cold pavement, and I waited some more. At 20 minutes, I called Neil. 4 rings and voicemail. I kept my voice even. Hey, sweetheart. It's Mom. I'm here. Outside baggage claim, door 7. Just let me know if you're close. No rush. At 40 minutes, I tried again. Voicemail. At an hour, I sat down on my suitcase because my feet hurt and my back was stiff from the flight, and I was tired of pretending I wasn't just standing on a curb, alone in a city that wasn't mine. A young airport employee with a high-visibility vest stopped and asked if I needed assistance. I said, no thank you. My son is just running late. She nodded in a way that told me she had seen this before. At an hour and 15 minutes, a text arrived from Neil. Mom, so sorry things got complicated. We had to take Steph's parents to the airport this morning. They were visiting from Scottsdale, and it ran long. We're on our way now, probably another 30 to 40 min. Sorry, traffic on 26 is brutal. I read it twice. Then I looked at the timestamp on my original message. It had been delivered. It had been read 40 minutes before this reply. I texted back, no worries, I'll be here. They arrived an hour and 50 minutes after I landed. Neil got out of the car and hugged me and said, sorry, so sorry, Mom, it was a whole thing. Stephanie leaned across the console and waved through the windshield with a smile that didn't quite reach the effort required to roll down the window. The kids were in the back seat with their headphones on. Lily looked up briefly and gave me a small wave. Owen did not look up at all. I told myself it was fine. They were children. Children had headphones. The house was exactly like the photographs, which I had looked at many times on the family's shared photo album that Stephanie maintained on her phone and occasionally added me to. Clean lines, white kitchen, the kind of furniture that looks comfortable but doesn't really yield when you sit in it. The backyard Neil had mentioned was impressive, large and landscaped, with string lights and a stone fire pit. In November, it was cold and unused, but I could see what it must look like in summer. My room was at the back of the house. It was small, clean, and completely neutral, the way a room looks when no one has made any particular effort for you, but has made sure nothing could be criticized. There was a bed and a side table and a lamp and a closet with empty hangers. No towels. I found them myself in the hall linen cupboard after 20 minutes of not wanting to ask. Stephanie was a project manager. She ran the house the way I imagined she ran her teams, efficiently, with everyone assigned a role they hadn't quite agreed to. Dinner was at 6:30, not 6 or 7. Wine was served, but not refilled unless you asked twice. The children did their homework before any screens and went to bed at 9 sharp. These were not bad rules. They were just rules that didn't bend, not even for company. On the first evening, I sat at the kitchen island while Stephanie cooked and tried to find the right pace for the conversation. I asked about her work. She gave me efficient answers. I asked about the children's school. She gave me more efficient answers. I mentioned that I used to make a sweet potato casserole for Thanksgiving and offered to make it again. She paused and said that was sweet, but she'd already planned the whole menu and she wouldn't want me to go to any trouble. Neil poured himself a drink and looked at his phone. That night in my narrow room, I told myself I was adjusting. Everyone adjusts. You don't arrive after a year and a half and expect to slot right in. I had been alone for a long time. I was out of practice with other people's rhythms. Tuesday was better in small ways. Owen asked me at breakfast about my job, whether I still worked, whether nursing was scary. I told him that I'd retired 2 years ago and that yes, it was sometimes scary, but mostly it was the kind of scared that makes you pay very close attention and that paying very close attention turns out to be the most useful skill there is. He seemed to actually hear this. He looked at me and nodded in that serious way 10-year-olds do when something lands. Lily showed me her sketchbook after school. Not the one I had brought, which was still in my bag upstairs because I hadn't known quite when to give it. The sketchbook she showed me was her current one, almost full, page after page of animals and houses and one very detailed drawing of a cat that she told me was named Persimmon. I told her it was the best cat I had ever seen in a drawing. She beamed. She came and sat beside me on the couch and showed me every page. That half hour with Lily on the couch was the best part of the trip. I know that now. That evening, Stephanie was on a call in the bedroom for most of dinner, so it was just me and Neil and the children. Neil made pasta. He was not a good cook in the way his father had not been a good cook, which meant I recognized the attempt and loved him for it. We talked a little. He asked about my house, my garden, whether I was seeing anyone. That last one said lightly, but with something underneath it. I didn't examine. I'm fine, I told him. I'm better than fine. I meant it. Wednesday, the day before Thanksgiving, Stephanie's mother and sister arrived from across town. I had not known they were coming. No one had mentioned it. They filled the kitchen with a particular kind of energy, that ease of people in a space that belongs to them by right of preference, and I found myself stepping back, making room, refilling my coffee cup in the pauses between their conversations. At some point in the afternoon, I went upstairs for a nap I did not actually take. I lay on the bed in the back room and listened to the house. Laughter from the kitchen. The children running somewhere. Stephanie's voice, lower than usual, intimate. The way voices go when they stop performing. I heard her say, through the thin wall or the open vent, I'm not entirely sure which. She's fine, Mom. She's just a lot. You know how she is. Always wanting to dig in. Some people don't know how to just be. I don't know who she was talking about. I know who she was talking about. I lay very still on the bed and looked at the ceiling. It was a good ceiling, smooth and white. I looked at it for a long time. Thanksgiving itself was what it was. The table was beautiful. Stephanie had a gift for that. For surfaces, everything was polished and arranged and photographed before anyone sat down. The food was good because Stephanie was competent at everything she applied herself to. There were 11 people at the table and I was the quietest of all of them. Neil sat at the far end. He kept glancing at me in a way that might have been checking on me or might have been apologizing. I could not tell the difference anymore. After dinner, while Stephanie's mother and sister helped clear, I went to the kitchen to help too. Stephanie said, "Oh no, please, we've got it. You relax. Go sit down." She said it the way you say something to remove a person from the room. I went and sat in the living room. Owen was on his tablet. Lily had fallen asleep on the couch. I sat in the armchair by the window and watched the street. It was dark and quiet outside, the way Thanksgiving nights are in residential neighborhoods. Everyone inside their warm houses, the world belonging to itself. I thought about my own house in Roanoke, about the table I hadn't set, the casserole I hadn't made, the bird I had decided not to buy because I was going to be here. I thought about Wanda, who was probably eating alone too, and Bet from church, who had called me 3 days ago to say she hoped it was everything I needed. I thought about the word need, what I had needed. what I had needed, what I had needed, what I had come here thinking I might find. The next morning was Friday. Stephanie and her mother and sister had plans, a shopping trip and lunch and something after. Neil had work, which apparently did not pause for the holiday weekend. The children were in their rooms. I came downstairs at 8 and made coffee in a kitchen that didn't know me yet, and probably never would. I sat at the island and opened my phone and looked at my flight information. Sunday, 2 more days. Then I put down my coffee and did something I had not planned to do. I opened my contacts and called my daughter-in-law from my first marriage. Not Neil's mother, because that was me. I mean the woman who had married the son I almost had. I mean my oldest friend, Roxanne, who had driven me to the hospital when Neil was born because his father wasn't there, and who had called me every week for 40 years, and who had said, when I told her about this trip, "Just come home if it gets to be too much, Harriet. You don't owe anyone your comfort." No, not Roxanne. The person I called was my niece, Claudine. Claudine was 38. She was my younger sister's daughter, and my sister had passed 6 years ago. And after that, Claudine and I had gotten close in the way that grief sometimes arranges people together. She lived in Denver, worked in hospital administration, called me every Sunday at noon. She had sent me a card on my birthday with a $20 bill inside and a note that said, "Spend this on something ridiculous." I had bought a very good candle with it and thought of her every time I lit it. I texted her, "Happy day after Thanksgiving, thinking of you." She called back in 4 minutes. "And Harriet," she said, "how's Portland? Did your son's wife poison the sweet potatoes?" "There were no sweet potatoes," I told her. "I wasn't allowed to make them." There was a pause. And then she said, carefully, "Are you okay?" I looked at the kitchen around me, the organized drawers, the curated dishes on the open shelves, the refrigerator covered in Lily's drawings, none of which were mine. "Not entirely," I said. She didn't ask me to explain. She just listened while I talked, which was what she always did. I told her about the airport. I told her about the room with no towels. I told her about the overheard conversation. I told her about Thanksgiving dinner and the armchair by the window and the way Neil had looked at me across the table like he was sorry about something he had already decided not to fix. When I finished, Claudine was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You've got 2 more days." "I know. What do you want to do with them?" I looked out the kitchen window at the backyard. The string lights were off. The fire pit was cold and full of last week's ash. "I want to go home," I said. "Then go." "It sounds like giving up." "It's not giving up," she said. "It's deciding. There's a difference." I booked a flight while she was still on the phone. There was a seat on a 2:15 that afternoon, a direct flight, a reasonable price. I booked it and felt something release in my chest that I had not known was held. I went upstairs and packed my suitcase with the quiet efficiency I had developed over 40 years of nursing, which is to say, quickly, completely, and without wasting a single motion. I left the gifts on the end of the bed, the beanie for Owen, the watercolor pencils and sketch pad for Lily, the journal for Neil. For Stephanie, the gold scarf, still in its tissue paper. I had been waiting for a right moment to give them, and understood now that I had been waiting for something the house was not going to offer. I wrote a note on the small pad I kept in my purse. It said, "Had to head home a little early. The gifts are here for the kids. It was lovely to see everyone. Travel safe over the holidays. Love, Mom." I put it on top of the gifts. I looked at it for a moment. I picked it back up and read it again. I put it back down. Then I wheeled my suitcase down the hall and down the stairs and out the front door, which I locked behind me with the spare key I returned to its hook in the entryway. I ordered a car to the airport from the porch. The November air hit my face, and it was cold and clear and completely honest, which felt right. The driver was a man who didn't talk much, which was fine. I looked out the window at Portland sliding past. The bridges, the river, the mountains somewhere behind the clouds, a city I had visited twice now and still didn't know. I wasn't sure I ever would. The airport was busy with post-holiday travelers. I moved through check-in and security and found my gate and sat down with a coffee I paid too much for and did not regret. My gate had a window facing the tarmac, and I watched the planes move slowly in and out of their positions, enormous and unhurried, and I thought, I know how you feel. Claudine texted, "You okay?" I typed back at the gate, "Planes on time." She sent a heart. I called her again from the gate, and we talked for an hour. I told her about Owen asking me about nursing, about Lily's sketchbook, about Persimmon the cat, drawn in pencil with absolute devotion. She told me about her weekend, about a hike she'd done with a friend, about a book she was reading that she wanted to send me. We talked the way we always talked, which was like two people who had decided to know each other and kept making that decision again. When they called my boarding group, I said goodbye and stood up and gathered my things and thought, this is what it feels like, being wanted. It doesn't announce itself or make promises. It just keeps showing up. Every Sunday at noon, every birthday card, every 4-minute callback. I was in the air by 2:45. The flight path took me east over the mountains, and I watched them from my window. The Cascades and then the Rockies, white and enormous and indifferent and beautiful. I ate a small bag of pretzels. I watched nothing on the screen in front of me. I thought about the monthly checks I had been sending Neil and Stephanie for 3 years. It had started when they bought the house and the mortgage was harder than they'd expected. Then it became help with the children's activities. Then it became something I did automatically. The way you leave the porch light on, out of habit, out of hope, out of not wanting to examine what stops you from turning it off. I thought about my will, which I had not updated since Neil's father passed, and which still listed things in the way you list them when you assume the world will stay as it was. I thought about Claudine, who called every Sunday. When I landed in Roanoke, Wanda was waiting for me at arrivals. I had not asked her to come. She had texted that morning, and I had told her about the early flight, and apparently that was enough for her because there she was, in her good coat, holding a paper cup of coffee from the stand inside the door. "You look tired," she said. "I am," I said. She handed me the coffee. "Come on." I made soup. I cried in the car, not from sadness, exactly. From the relief of being in the right place with the right person, which is something you don't realize you've been missing until you feel it again. Wanda patted my knee at a red light and didn't say anything, which was exactly correct. We ate soup at her kitchen table, and she let me talk and didn't offer opinions unless I asked, which is a rarer skill than people think. By 9 o'clock, I was home and in my own bed, and I slept for 10 hours straight, which I had not done in years. The following week, I went to my bank. The same branch, the same teller window where I had deposited my paychecks for 30 years. I sat with the manager, a man named Phil, who had helped me with my accounts when I retired and who treated me like someone whose decisions deserved to be taken seriously. "I want to stop an automatic transfer," I said, "and I want to make some other changes." He asked which account. I told him. He brought it up on the screen, and I told him to stop the monthly payment to my son's account. I told him to move the amount into a separate savings account instead. He typed and printed, and I signed. Then I went to see my attorney, a woman named Frances who had been practicing estate law for 30 years and had the kind of presence that made you feel like your affairs were in capable hands. I told her I wanted to revise my will. I told her I wanted to establish a trust with Claudine as the primary beneficiary. I told her I wanted to redirect the life insurance as well. She didn't ask me to explain. Good attorneys don't. The paperwork took 2 weeks. When I signed the final documents, Frances looked at me over her reading glasses and said, "It's always the right people who hesitate the longest before doing this." I don't know if that's true, but I thought about it on the drive home. Neil called in December. I let it go to voicemail. His message said he had noticed the transfer had stopped and that he wanted to talk about it. He sounded confused rather than angry, which was somehow worse. He said, "Mom, I'm not sure what happened, but I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. Can you call me back when you have a minute?" I listened to it twice. I did not call back. Stephanie texted 3 days later. Hi, Harriet. Neil mentioned there might be an issue with your account. Just want to make sure everything's okay on your end. Let us know if you need help with anything. Heart emoji. I put my phone in the kitchen drawer. Claudine came for Christmas. She drove from Denver in her old Subaru with snow tires and a back seat full of badly wrapped presents and arrived on the 23rd because she said she wanted to be there for the lead-up, not just the day. We decorated the tree together. I showed her where I kept the ornaments from when Neil was young, and she handled them carefully and asked about each one: the clay handprint from 1988, the wooden soldier that had belonged to my mother. We cooked Christmas Eve dinner from scratch. A roast and roasted vegetables and a pie that took 3 hours and was worth every minute. We ate by the fire and listened to Nat King Cole because Claudine had started to love him after I played him for her one afternoon years ago, and it had stuck. We talked about my sister, her mother, about the way grief changes shape over time but doesn't go away, just becomes something you carry differently. On Christmas morning, she slept late and I made coffee and sat in my chair by the window and watched the snow. My street was quiet. The house was warm. I could hear her moving around upstairs, the particular rhythm of a person who is comfortable where they are. I thought about the previous Thanksgiving, about Neil's table with its arranged centerpiece and photographed place settings, about the armchair by the window where I had sat alone. I thought about this window, this chair, the snow outside, and the coffee in my hands, and the sound of someone in my house who wanted to be there. I am 67 years old. I spent most of my life believing that love was something I had to earn from the people I had given it to. I kept tallying, kept waiting, kept telling myself that the distance was temporary, that the right words or the right gesture or the right holiday would finally close the gap. It took a cold curb at PDX and a room with no towels and a voice through a thin wall to make me understand what I should have understood long before. Some doors are only closed from the inside, and I was the one holding them shut. I am not a woman who waits to be included. Not anymore. My house is mine. My mornings are mine. Claudine calls every Sunday, and sometimes we talk for an hour, and sometimes we talk for 5 minutes, and either way, when we hang up, I feel like myself. I don't hear from Neil much. A text on my birthday. A Christmas card in Stephanie's handwriting that I'm fairly sure he signed without reading. I keep it on the mantle for a while, and then I don't. What I know now is this: love that requires you to make yourself smaller isn't love, it's an arrangement. And you can spend your whole life being grateful for arrangements, or you can decide that you deserve the real thing, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself. The kind that shows up in an old Subaru in a snowstorm. The kind that shows up in an old Subaru in a snowstorm. The kind that hands you coffee at arrivals without being asked. That's the kind I have now. It took me 67 years and one very long afternoon on a curb in Portland to find it. But I found it, and I am not letting go.